Now, not only did he want you to know that he's the most Jewy Jew out there, but he also wanted you to know that he was the most zealous persecutor of the church, up until the point that he had private revelation, because of course he was chosen out of the entire world to receive revelation from Jesus Christ, because he is the cream of the crop. Paul's head was huge. You just could not get better than him in his own eyes. He spoke about himself in a way that healthy people don't speak about themselves. Welcome back to our series in which we're asking the question, did Paul have a personality disorder? And if you're new to my channel, there's actually a video that precedes this one, so I do suggest you go back and you watch that. That gives us a foundational understanding of what narcissistic personality disorder is, and that's the disorder that I believe Paul of Tarsus actually had. And I believe that that personality disorder is what motivated him to become a cult leader who went and influenced many people to accept upon themselves his belief system that he introduced. Now, of course, these are very big claims. I'm saying that Paul of Tarsus was a charismatic cult leader who was motivated by narcissistic personality disorder. And Christians probably will not like this. So in order to bolster these claims, we're going to have to go and we're going to have to find evidence for it. And we're going to use the best source possible. We're going to use Paul's own writings to see what Paul has to say about the way he related to the world. And I believe that an intellectually honest person will come to agree with me in the end. And you know what? Even if you don't, at least you'll have learned more about narcissistic personality disorder, which is a disorder that affects roughly 5% of the population. But it can have drastic impact not only upon the person with the disorder, but all the people who are involved with them. So we are going to be examining the personality of Paul through his letters. But before we get there, let's even ask the question, like, why was Paul so important to Christianity? Like, why does everybody speak about Paul of Tarsus? And the answer to that is, Paul was really the first thing that we know about Christianity. You see, his writings appeared about 20 years after the alleged death of Jesus. Before that time, there were no extant writings. Now, people will say, oh, but the Gospels were written by the apostles who were actually with Jesus. Now, I would point out that that is actually an article of faith. Christians believe that based upon nothing. The Gospels themselves don't even make that claim. The one thing we do know is that Paul's letters were the first foundational theologies of Christianity that were presented to the broader world. I mean, even the historians of the period that Jesus lived in, allegedly, they didn't even write about him. They didn't write about any of the so-called miracles that had taken place that are presented inside of the Gospels. Nothing. History is silent on that matter. So the first thing we really know about Christianity comes from Paul. So we really have to see what he has to say. All right, we do know from Paul's writings that there seems to have been some early Jesus cult that existed during his days. But what Paul did was he came along and he said he had a private revelation from Jesus Christ that gave him new information regarding the salvation of man. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. It's Galatians chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. Now, bear in mind that Paul never met Jesus. And in order for the early church to accept his claims, they had to believe him. They had to trust him that he received this new salvation plan for mankind. And Paul tells us clearly in Ephesians chapter 3 that this was a mystery, that this was information that was revealed to him. Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you. That is the mystery made known to me by revelation, as I have already written briefly. In reading this, then, you will be able to understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which was not made known to people in other generations, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to God's holy apostles and prophets. So Paul came along with this grand mystery, and he introduced radical ideas that are completely antithetical to the Hebrew Scriptures, namely that there is no need to keep ritual law, and that salvation requires an intermediary and human sacrifice, and that non-Jews are heir to the covenant as Jews are. Now, we'll discuss all of those points in a different video. But the point that I want to bring out is that Paul came along with this radical change to the accepted theologies of the time, both the Jewish theologies and whatever it was the early church was teaching. And there was tension there clearly inside of the letters, such as we see in the letters to the Galatians. And Paul makes it a point to tell us that he intentionally did not go to consult with the apostles that were in Jerusalem once he received his revelation. No. He went off to Arabia. He was not subjugated to any man. He had his ideas, he had his revelation, and everybody was supposed to believe him. All right? Very important point. And Now that we understand Paul's radical impact on Christianity because his letters were incorporated into the Christian canon and they became really the basis for Christian thought, now we can go on and we can examine Paul himself and his writings through the lens of narcissistic personality disorder. So the question is what is NPD, narcissistic personality disorder? It is a shame disorder. People with this disorder, unfortunately, feel tremendous shame over who they are, over things that they have done. They don't have a strong core sense of self. And in order to counteract the feeling of worthlessness, they build up a false persona that they present to the outside world. And that false persona becomes everything to them. When we are confronted with a person with narcissistic personality disorder, we expect them to have a grandiose sense of self. They think they're just like the best thing since sliced bread. They're preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, beauty, idealization. They need to be top tier in everything. They believe they're special, they are unique. And I mean, everybody is in their own way, but their specialness and their uniqueness means that they're really outside the realm of society. They're like smarter than everybody. They're better than everybody. They don't have to play by the same rules as everybody. There's just a difference in the way they perceive themselves. They have a sense of entitlement. They can get whatever they want, no matter if it's done through unethical means or not. They have arrogant attitudes, and they demand excessive admiration. They need that admiration in order to fuel themselves. They also engage in exploitive behaviors. They're chameleons. They are master manipulators. All right, now not all of this is seen very easily, especially in the covert or the fragile, the vulnerable narcissist. Those guys hide it really well, but those belief systems are still deeply entrenched inside of them. You just might not necessarily see it on the surface. Now, when you take these list of characteristics that I just said and you boil it down, you just put on a paper, you read it off, it sounds really bad. Like if you saw somebody with those character traits, you would probably think you would recognize it right away, right? But the answer is no. These guys, like I said, are very good at masking that. And they usually come off as very charismatic, very likable, they ooze charm, and people are just magnetically drawn toward them. Many times they're very intelligent and they're very cunning, and they're actually very proud of being able to manipulate people into thinking that they're just like the sweetest, kindest people out there. But the truth is that people with narcissistic personality disorder have reduced empathy, and they have emotional barricades. They shut down their heart, and their heart becomes very, very cold, and they can't feel somebody else's pain like they feel their own pain. They have feelings. They feel their own senses of happiness, of sadness, of whatever. They feel things very strongly at times, but they don't feel your feelings, right? They might have cognitive empathy. They can understand what you're feeling, but they're not going to be able to align themselves with what you're feeling. Let's get back to Paul. Let's see what Paul says about Paul. Number one, we think that he's unique and he's special and he has this grand mystery and he has his new ideas, and he insists that he didn't receive any information from anybody else. It came only from Jesus himself. I mean, he was totally in a class all his own. And in fact, in Galatians 1:14, he actually compares himself to Jesus. He says, "You welcomed me as if I were an angel of God, as if I were Christ Jesus himself." I mean, think about that. He didn't suffice it to say that, you know what, you welcomed me very nicely, you gave me honor. No, he compares himself to Jesus. And if you're a Christian, you believe that Jesus is God, well, that should strike you as being blasphemy, right? He held himself up at the same level as your God. Paul definitely held himself in very high esteem, and he went out of his way to make sure that you know just how great he is. He did this in many different ways, such as, think about it. In the historical context of the time, the Pharisees were the religious, they were the Orthodox Jews of the time, and they were held in very high respect by the Greco-Roman world. They were considered the authentic preservers of Judaism, of the Torah. So Paul, when he wanted to express who he was, he wanted to show you his credentials. He made sure to say that not only was he a Hebrew, but he was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. And not only was he a Pharisee, he was the Pharisee of Pharisees. Moreover, he was circumcised on the 8th day. I mean, that's ridiculous. Like, nobody talks like that. But he had to make sure that you know he's like the most Jewish of the Jewish. Now, not only did he want you to know that he's the most Jewy Jew out there, but he also wanted you to know that he was the most zealous persecutor of the church, up until the point that he had private revelation. Because, of course, he was chosen out of the entire world to receive revelation from Jesus Christ, because he is the cream of the crop, right? That's the way Paul's mind worked. Moreover, he wanted you to know how brilliant, how smart he was. And he says in Galatians 1:14, I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. I mean, Paul's head was huge. You just could not get better than him in his own eyes, all right? He spoke about himself in a way that healthy people don't speak about themselves. People with a healthy sense of self, they don't need to broadcast how great they are, how big they are, how successful they are, right? If they're successful, you see it. If they're not, they don't. But he had to make sure that you know he's the top of the top, right? He had to have that huge following. Now, again, not all narcissists will be so open about this. Covert narcissists will be a little less. I personally think that Paul was probably a grandiose narcissist. And there are just different presentations of these traits. But the important point to note is that a person with NPD has this really inflated sense of false self to compensate for the fact that they feel very small inside. And in order to support this false self, they actually live in a fantasy world. Now, this fantasy world is very, very difficult to understand, and it's a very dangerous place to be because it is so closely aligned with reality, but it misses it by a few degrees. Like, they can be in the same situation, they can be functioning, and they can look like they're really participating inside of life as other human beings. But the way they're perceiving the information that is coming into them, it's being distorted inside of their brains. So you can have a group of people are perceiving the situation one way, and in the mind of the narcissist, the information is just coming in completely differently. And that makes them feel that they're outside the realm of everybody else. And their goal is to live inside this fantasy world. So in this fantasy world, they are everything. They're like a godlike creature. And people, human beings, are objects or tools for them to gain satisfaction in whatever form they need from them, right? Now, this fantasy world of the narcissist was created, typically speaking, by a child who had no control over his own life. And tragically, very frequently, no control over his own body. The vast majority of narcissists were children who were severely abused. And because reality was so extremely painful, they escaped it by detaching emotionally and building all kinds of defense mechanisms around themselves, including this fantasy world in which they are the godlike figure. You see, in the narcissist's mind, they were abused, so they said, no more abuse. If anybody is going to abuse, it's going to be me. If anybody is going to control, it's going to be me. If anybody is going to hurt, it's going to be me. I am going to be the one who makes decisions around here. I'm taking back my power. So in response to them having no control over themselves as children, people with NPD develop a very unhealthy need to control everything, including people. And people with NPD can be very, very rigid in their expectations, and they never want to be challenged. They never want to be questioned about their behaviors. And of course, quite significantly, they never want to have boundaries imposed upon them, and they never want to be told no. I mean, as soon as you tell a narcissist no to something they really want, you're going to get one of two reactions. They're either going to turn cold, they're going to shut down, they're going to start stonewalling you, or they might react violently. They might have an adult temper tantrum. It depends upon the nature of that specific narcissist. You see, the way a narcissist sees the world is through the lens of a fantasy movie. They're the director and everybody else is a supporting actor or a prop. And those people must behave according to the script that the narcissist has laid out for them inside of their mind. And if they have any autonomy, if they don't behave according to the script, that is very, very frustrating for the narcissist. Moreover, it can actually be very, very shocking to them, because it wakes them up. It shakes them out of their fantasy. If they see that they have not successfully trained somebody to be their puppy, then all of a sudden they realize, I'm really not omnipotent. I'm really not as powerful as I think I am. I really don't control the world. And it makes them feel weak. It makes them feel that they're really not godlike. It makes the facade fall, and it can be really, really traumatic for a person who does not have a strong sense of self. And you as an outsider, when you see that facade fall, it can be really, really scary. It can be sad. It can be painful. Because at that moment, you see that the person with NPD is really not this super powerful person. They are really a very, very scared, tormented soul. So you can have this intellectually brilliant person who just dissolves into a temper tantruming toddler inside of an adult body. It's really painful to witness. Now, let's get back to Paul. We see that Paul had these temper tantrums when he lost control, right? Whenever he was challenged, he would throw these massive temper tantrums. We see this very clearly in the letter to the Galatians, in which Paul is writing to the church that he established, who were taking a different path, who were following a different iteration of Christianity than Paul had presented. And Paul lost himself. I mean, these were his objects. These were his puppies he had trained. And they were listening to somebody else. His envy was activated. His authority was challenged. And Paul was really upset. So Paul is basically like foaming at the mouth when he's writing this letter. And he actually famously opens up Galatians chapter 3 with saying, "Who bewitched you, you foolish Galatians?" I mean, he was really, really angry. Personally, my favorite verse is Galatians 6:11. "See what large letters I use as I write to you with my own hand." He was screaming in text. It's like using all caps in a text message. He wanted them to know that he was really upset, right? Paul could absolutely not handle losing control, which is one of the two things that narcissists hate the most. So the two things that the narcissist hates the most is, number one, the loss of control. They don't want anybody to have autonomy, to have a different opinion. They want everybody to step in line behind them. They are the head honcho. They are the leader of the show. Number two, the second thing that they hate and perhaps they fear the most is the risk of exposure. They work so hard to build up this false image to the world that the threat of that being taken away from them, that people should see what they really think about themselves, it's terrifying. This is the stuff of nightmares. This is the thing that keeps narcissists up at night, all right? Loss of control and exposure. And we'll speak about that more in coming videos. But for now, let's get back to control. So narcissists generally have a very low respect for other human beings, especially once they manage to break you. They're like, you've just proven to me that I am all-powerful. You are weak. I have no reason to respect you if you are weak, okay? And that's what they do. They go through their life breaking people, hunting and conquering, all right? That's what it's about. It's this game. I'm going to conquer you. I'm going to make you my object, my puppy. So narcissists love to find people who are malleable, who they can mold, who they can create into their own puppets, all right? Now, when I say the word love, I don't mean emotional love. I mean, they enjoy having an object that they can work with. It has nothing to do with emotions, right? It has to do with servitude. And come to find out, many male narcissists are actually big misogynists. They do not respect women at all. Women are playthings, they are objects. They are things to be used to satisfy the narcissist's own desires. Now, a narcissist won't come out and tell you that, and in fact, they might appear to hold women in high regard, but really, they don't. They don't. Women are just toys. Despite not respecting women, male narcissists will actually frequently have very frequent relationships with women. And this will be for a few different purposes. Number one, women are easier to break. Women are easier to control, at least in the narcissist's mind. Number two, well, playthings. Hello. Very simple. It's a source of supply for them. Now, when we examine Paul's letters, it becomes very, very clear that he was a misogynist himself. He wanted to control women. He felt women were second class. He wanted to shut them down, silence them up, and make them listen to him. Let's look at some verses. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he makes sure to delineate the pecking order. But I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is man, and the head of Christ is God, right? Women are at the bottom of the totem pole. Likewise, he tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission as the law says. The law doesn't say that. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Also in 1 Timothy chapter 2, a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. Okay, in Paul's mind, women were second class, under the control of man, and they should just know their place and be silent. He was a very disrespectful misogynist, and I believe that stemmed from his godlike persona, his need for control, his need to obtain supply, and simply the fact that he was a narcissist. Now, it wasn't just women that Paul wanted to control. He wanted to control men as well. And he, over time, became a person who was difficult to get along with because he had a very rigid personality. And we actually see in Acts 15 that he refused to travel with John Mark, and he got into a big fight with Barnabas about this. Now, bear in mind that these were people who knew him well, and that is something that is very common inside of narcissistic relationships. But I guess before I get there, let me make a disclaimer. I don't actually believe that Acts and Paul's writings are on the same page, nor do I believe that Acts is historical. However, in a non-historical document, in a fictional writing, you don't generally put something embarrassing about the character that you're trying to build up, and Acts is trying to build up Paul. So if it's including an embarrassing story about Paul, we can assume that that probably was historical. It was an incident that the author of Acts knew about, so he did include it. So according to the criteria of embarrassment, we can assume that this actually did happen, all right? So we have this fight between Barnabas and Paul over John Mark. Anyways, let's get back to narcissistic relationships. So narcissistic relationships, if it's a superficial relationship, if it is people outside of the narcissist close inner circle, then many times people will just think, okay, this is just a fantastic person, kind, charismatic, whatever it is, and they will never get a chance to see the true person. But when it comes to family, when it comes to people who know them very, very well, narcissists often have a very painful, very rocky sort of relationship because maintaining a positive persona takes work. It takes effort. And when the narcissist is tired, when they're stressed, when they're ill, that mask might slip off and people who are around them will see them at their worst. So over time, those closest to the narcissist realize that perfection is just a mirage. Another reason that close relationships fail inside the narcissist world is that the narcissist has an absolutely crippling fear of abandonment and rejection. And because they simply cannot bear the pain of somebody removing their attention from them, the narcissist will build up a defense mechanism to try to make sure that they're never going to feel that pain. So what they will do is they will either emotionally or physically detach from that person, even when the relationship is going really great. All of a sudden, they will just withdraw from the relationship because they don't want to get hurt. This is called a discard. So it can be emotionally, it can be you're still living in the house together with the narcissist, but all of a sudden they just get very, very cold. Or they can they can leave. They can just depart from your life. A discard. And that's because the narcissist is too afraid of getting hurt. So they say, I would rather do the hurting than be the one who is hurt. So familiar relationships are generally the most painful ones inside of the life of a narcissist. And again, it's their maladaptive behaviors that cause the most turmoil. But there's also another factor that really causes tremendous pain and tremendous turmoil inside of these relationships. And that is that most narcissists will never have the ability to self-reflect. They have a diminished capacity to self-reflect, to analyze, and to accept accountability for what they have done wrong. You see, because it's a shame disorder, they cannot go there. They cannot accept that they have behaved wrongly, that they are not omnipotent, that they are not all-powerful, and they will project their bad behavior onto other people so they don't have to deal with it. In fact, if you confront a narcissist with their bad behavior, they will instinctively go into a reflex called DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. They will deny that they've done wrong, they will project the wrongdoing onto the other person, and they will turn themselves into the victim. So conflict is very much enmeshed inside of a narcissist's life. And we definitely see that Paul had many conflicts with people. He was just not the easiest guy to get along with. And those people were the people who knew him well. Let's wrap up on a positive note. Narcissists are people who have built many layers of defense mechanisms in order to protect themselves from getting hurt. And because they have so many different layers of defense, it's very hard to get through to the narcissist and to get them to see reality for what it is. They would prefer to live in their fantasy world. But there can come a time in which you can penetrate the outer shell and you could reach inside and you can find that pure, beautiful, vulnerable child inside who's locked away inside of a dungeon. And you can tell them that there is hope. But in order to get to that state, there usually has to be something called a collapse or a mortification. And that's when the facade, the image that the narcissist has worked so hard to build, falls apart. The fantasy world is no longer sustainable. It's a moment when a perfect storm is created, when the narcissist is forced to confront the reality that fantasy is not congruent with truth. And they are forced to say, you know what, I'm really not that facade. I'm not the perfect person. And projecting onto other people is not the truth. The failings are my own. I have made mistakes. Collapse is a very painful experience for a narcissist. It literally rips them out of delusion. And it forces them to confront the reality that they've been trying so hard to escape. It's not a fun thing for a narcissist to go through. It's quite sad. Many of them actually feel like they're dying. They have physical reactions. They can become ill. They can vomit. They become depressed. They feel like everything's just shutting down. They can't function. It's not a state that we wish upon anybody. But at the same time, collapse can be the biggest blessing inside the life of a narcissist. Because it's that one moment, it's that seventh plague, when all the delusion clears away, the fantasy falls, and they see things truly for the first time. And if they grasp hold of that moment, if they say, I don't want to live in fantasy, I want to confront what hurts, and I want to heal it, then they have the ability to enter reality as a more healthy human being. They can work on the maladaptive behaviors, they can overcome their challenges, and they can use their power to shine. Now, the truth is most narcissists will never get to that state. Most narcissists will never go through a collapse enough that they are able to see reality, embrace reality, acknowledge wrongdoing, seek help, and most importantly, follow through with getting help in the appropriate way. Because even if a person, they get help, they go for psychotherapy, they sit and they do DBT, whatever it is, but they're doing it from a manipulative angle, they're not fully engaging, then they're hindering their own healing. And it's very possible for a person with narcissistic personality disorder to regress and to end up back where they were. So it involves a lot of hard work. It involves really a lot of hard work, but there is hope for the person who wants to change, they want to overcome their challenges. And I pray that anybody with this condition will take it seriously and will put in the effort. Such a person is truly a hero. Without getting help, without acknowledging, then a narcissist's power is channeled incorrectly, and they become very, very destructive people who bring themselves down and bring down other people together with them. One of the ways they do this is by establishing cults, such as I believe Paul did. Now again, I do believe that Paul was one of these guys who was affected by NPD, and we've spoken about his need for control, his delusions of grandeur. We've spoken about his overwhelmingly powerful personality, his temper tantrums, his anger, but there's still more to explore. And as I said, we're going to continue peeling this back layer by layer until we develop a full, complete picture of who Paul was. So let's keep learning.